April 20th, 1943. The morning sky over the English Channel churned with gray clouds as Lieutenant Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke watched the first P-47 Thunderbolts taxi onto the rain-slicked runway at Royal Air Force Boxted. The aircraft looked like flying milk bottles, their enormous radial engines mounted on stubby fuselages that seemed too fat to fly with any grace. Around him, pilots from the 56th Fighter Group muttered curses under their breath. They had trained on the sleek, nimble P-40 Warhawk, and now the Army Air Forces expected them to take this 7-ton monster into combat against the Luftwaffe's battle-hardened veterans. Zemke himself harbored doubts. The Republic Aviation-built P-47 weighed more than 13,000 pounds fully loaded, nearly twice the weight of the Supermarine Spitfire that had saved Britain during the darkest days of the Battle of Britain. Its nickname, the Jug, reflected what most pilots thought. It resembled a milk jug with wings. Worse still, early models suffered from cockpit visibility issues, sluggish acceleration at low altitudes, and a turning radius that made every dogfight feel like steering a locomotive through a ballet. Across the channel, German fighter pilots of Jagdgeschwader 2 and 26 had already received intelligence reports about the new American fighter. In the officers' mess at Beaumont-le-Roger airfield in occupied France, Hauptmann Johannes Seifert raised his beer stein in mock salute. "The Americans send us a heavy truck with wings," he announced to roars of laughter from his fellow pilots. "We shall teach these cowboys the price of arrogance." The Luftwaffe veterans had good reason for confidence. Their Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s had dominated European skies for years, their pilots honed by combat experience that stretched from the Spanish Civil War through the brutal Eastern Front campaigns. The P-47's development history had been fraught with compromise and controversy, as documented in contemporary Army Air Force's technical reports. Republic Aviation's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli, had built the aircraft around the massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, a powerhouse capable of producing 2,000 horsepower. But that power came at a cost. The aircraft required an enormous four-bladed propeller, nearly 13 feet in diameter, which necessitated exceptionally long landing gear struts. These struts, when retracted, filled much of the wing space that might otherwise have housed additional fuel or ammunition. First Lieutenant Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, a Polish-American pilot assigned to the 56th Fighter Group, remembered his initial reaction to the Thunderbolt with stark clarity. "I thought they were joking," he later recounted in post-war interviews. "This thing was supposed to fight the 109. It looked like something you'd use to haul freight, not chase fighters." Gabreski had spent months flying liaison missions with a Polish RAF squadron where he'd witnessed Spitfires dancing through the sky with balletic grace. The P-47, by comparison, handled like a freight train, fast on the straightaway, but ponderous in the turns. Yet beneath that ungainly exterior lurked capabilities that would revolutionize aerial warfare. The P-47's 8 Browning M250 caliber machine guns represented more firepower than any single-seat fighter in the world. Each gun could fire 800 rounds per minute, and the aircraft carried approximately 400 rounds per gun. When all 8 guns fired simultaneously, the Thunderbolt could pour 3,200 rounds per minute into the space ahead. Enough concentrated firepower to saw a bomber in half or shred a fighter into aluminum confetti. But in April of 1943, none of that mattered to the anxious pilots climbing into their cockpits for the first escort missions over occupied Europe. May 4th, 1943, the mission briefing at Horsham St. Faith began at 0500 hours, with intelligence officers spreading maps across wooden tables still scarred from countless previous briefings. The target: enemy installations near Antwerp, Belgium. The 56th Fighter Group would provide high cover for B-17 Flying Fortresses of the 8th Air Force's bombing campaign. For most Thunderbolt pilots, this would be their first combat mission over enemy territory, their first chance to prove or disprove everything they feared about their massive aircraft. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin sat in the briefing room, studying the mission profile with growing unease. The P-47s would climb to 30,000 feet, an altitude where their turbocharged engines could finally breathe and deliver the power Kartveli had promised. But reaching that altitude required time and fuel, resources they couldn't spare if they encountered enemy fighters during the climb. According to Army Air Force's after-action reports archived at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, early P-47 missions suffered from critical fuel limitations that restricted their effective combat radius to barely 175 miles from base. The German response was swift and merciless. As the American formation crossed into Belgian airspace at 09:15 hours, Luftwaffe controllers at Deelen in the Netherlands scrambled elements of Jagdgeschwader 1 and 26. Oberleutnant Klaus Mitusch, a veteran with more than 40 confirmed victories, led his Schwarm, a 4-aircraft tactical formation, into an intercept trajectory. Through his gun sight, Mitusch watched the unfamiliar silhouettes of the P-47s lumber across the sky. "They fly like barges on the Rhine," he radioed to his wingman. "Attack from below and behind. They'll never see us coming." What happened next shattered German assumptions about the new American fighter. As Mitusch's FW-190 pulled up beneath a P-47 flown by Lieutenant Quince Brown, Brown spotted the German in his mirror and immediately pushed the stick forward, diving away at full throttle. The Thunderbolt's massive engine screamed as the aircraft accelerated past 400 miles per hour, then 450, then an astonishing 500 miles per hour. Mitusch followed, but his Focke-Wulf began shuddering violently as it approached its structural limits. Brown kept diving, the P-47's robust airframe, strengthened by Republic's insistence on redundant engineering, absorbing stresses that would have torn apart lighter fighters. By the time Brown pulled out at 15,000 feet, executing a zooming climb back toward altitude, Mitusch had lost visual contact. The German ace would later report that the American fighter possessed unnatural diving speed, possibly rocket-assisted. In reality, the P-47's weight, the very characteristic that made it seem so ungainly, became an asset in the dive. Combined with the slippery aerodynamics of its teardrop-shaped fuselage, the Thunderbolt could outdive virtually any aircraft in the European theater. But not every encounter ended favorably for the Americans. According to mission records preserved at Maxwell Air Force Base, the 56th Fighter Group lost 2 P-47s during that first mission, one to mechanical failure and one to a well-executed bounce by experienced German pilots who caught their target in a vulnerable climbing turn. The pilot who went down over Belgium, Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson, would survive and eventually become one of the war's leading aces. But his first combat mission ended with a harrowing parachute descent into occupied territory, only to be rescued by the Belgian resistance. The real lesson of that day emerged not from individual dogfights, but from what happened when American pilots stopped trying to turn with the German fighters and instead used the P-47's strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Zemke, leading the high squadron, recognized that the Thunderbolt's superior high-altitude performance gave it a decisive advantage in what pilots called energy fighting, combat that prioritized speed and altitude over turning radius. When a pair of Bf-109s attempted to climb and engage Zemke's squadron at 28,000 feet, the German fighters wallowed in the thin air, their engines gasping for oxygen, while the P-47's turbo-superchargers delivered full power. Zemke rolled his Thunderbolt into a diving pass, closed to within 300 yards and squeezed the trigger. The .850 caliber guns erupted with a hammering roar that rattled his entire aircraft. Armor-piercing and incendiary rounds converged on the lead Messerschmitt, and the German fighter simply came apart, wings folding upward, fuselage breaking in half, the pilot never having a chance to bail out. June 22, 1943. By midsummer, the tactical picture over occupied Europe had begun shifting in subtle but significant ways. Lieutenant Colonel Zemke had transformed the 56th Fighter Group into what would become known as the Zemke Wolfpack, implementing aggressive new tactics specifically designed to exploit the P-47's unique characteristics. Instead of the traditional 3-aircraft Vic formation inherited from British doctrine, Zemke adopted the German Schwarm, 4 aircraft in 2 pairs, each pair maintaining mutual support while operating with greater flexibility. The transformation required more than new formations. Zemke drilled his pilots relentlessly in energy management, the art of converting altitude into speed and speed back into altitude. He emphasized boom and zoom tactics, dive on the enemy from superior altitude, make a single high-speed pass, and climb back to safety before the Germans could respond. Never try to turn with a 109 or 190, Zemke lectured during training sessions at Boxted. Use your speed, use your dive, use your firepower. Make one pass and get out. This tactical evolution coincided with technical improvements to the P-47 itself. Republic aviation engineers, responding to field reports from combat pilots, developed the Razorback canopy modification that dramatically improved rearward visibility, a critical enhancement for pilots whose lives depended on seeing threats before they arrived. Additionally, the introduction of water injection systems allowed pilots to temporarily boost engine power by up to 300 horsepower during emergency combat situations, though at the cost of significantly increased fuel consumption. German pilots, meanwhile, were adapting their own tactics. Hauptmann Josef Sepp Wurmheller, commanding officer of the 2nd Gruppe of Jagdgeschwader II, issued new standing orders to his Staffeln. Avoid diving engagements with the Thunderbolt at all costs. Force them to turn or climb slowly. Attack during their vulnerable moments, when they're forming up after takeoff, or when they're low on fuel preparing to return to England. As documented in Luftwaffe operational records examined by post-war historians, German fighter groups began conserving their forces, launching intercepts only when they held clear tactical advantages. The strategic bombing campaign intensified throughout the summer of 1943, with American B-17s and B-24 Liberators striking ever deeper into German territory. On July 28th, the 8th Air Force launched a devastating raid against the Fieseler aircraft plant at Kassel, a mission that would test the P-47's capabilities at the extreme edge of its combat radius. The 56th, 78th, and 353rd Fighter Groups provided escort, their P-47s equipped with newly developed external fuel tanks that extended their range to nearly 300 miles. Captain Francis Gabreski, now a flight leader in the 61st Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Bf-109s over the German border near Aachen. The German pilots, expecting the Americans to turn back due to fuel constraints, had positioned themselves for attacks against the returning bombers. They didn't account for the belly tanks that gave the P-47s extra endurance. Gabreski's flight dropped their external tanks and dove on the unsuspecting Germans from 25,000 feet. What followed was a masterclass in the energy fighting doctrine Zemke had instilled. Gabreski's P-47 accelerated to over 500 miles per hour in the dive, closing the distance before the German flight leader could react. At 400 yards, Gabreski opened fire, a 2-second burst that sent 8 streams of 50 caliber rounds converging on the target. The Messerschmitt's engine exploded in a gout of flame and oil, and the aircraft nosed over into a terminal spin. Gabreski zoomed back to altitude, executed a Chandelle turn, and rolled in on a second target. Another burst, another kill. Within 90 seconds, he had destroyed 2 aircraft and damaged a third. The transformation was complete. The fighter that German pilots had mocked 3 months earlier had become a deadly predator that dominated the airspace wherever it appeared. Republic Aviation's gamble on raw power over agility was paying dividends in the crucible of aerial combat. August 17, 1943. The date would be remembered as Black Thursday, though that grim designation wouldn't be officially applied until a later raid in October. The 8th Air Force mounted a massive strike against the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt production facilities at Regensburg, sending 376 heavy bombers deep into the heart of Germany. For the P-47 groups, the mission represented an agonizing limitation. Even with external tanks, they could only escort the bombers to the German border before fuel constraints forced them to turn back, leaving the B-17s and B-24s to face the Luftwaffe alone for the final approaches and return legs. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, now flying with the 61st Fighter Squadron after his earlier rescue from occupied Belgium, was assigned to the return leg escort. His P-47, nicknamed All Hell, carried the standard armament of 8 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing. Each gun was loaded with a mix of ammunition types, armor-piercing incendiary rounds designed to penetrate aircraft structures and ignite fuel, ball ammunition for general-purpose damage, and tracer rounds that allowed pilots to walk their fire onto target. The combined weight of fire from all 8 guns totaled approximately 100 pounds per second, more destructive power than the main armament of many warships from the First World War. The bomber stream emerged from German airspace in tatters, having run a gauntlet of concentrated Luftwaffe attacks that had cost 60 aircraft and 600 men. As Johnson's flight made contact with the battered formations near Frankfurt, he witnessed the full fury of German fighter tactics. Bf-109s and Fw-190s swarmed around the bombers like wolves around wounded buffalo, pressing their attacks with suicidal determination. A Messerschmitt flashed across Johnson's nose, and he instinctively pulled lead and fired. The convergence of 8 gun streams created a wall of steel that the German fighter flew directly into. The 109 disintegrated, literally came apart in mid-air, pieces of wing, fuselage, and propeller scattering across the sky. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, Johnson later recounted in interviews preserved at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. I'd seen gun camera footage from Spitfires and Hurricanes. They'd peck away at a target, put holes in it, maybe start a fire. But the P-47's 850s didn't peck. They obliterated. It was like hitting someone with a sledgehammer instead of a baseball bat. The firepower advantage became even more apparent during head-on attacks, a tactic the Luftwaffe increasingly favored against the well-armed bombers. German fighters would approach from 12 o'clock high, diving through the bomber formations in a single devastating pass before climbing away. P-47 pilots learned to intercept these attacks, positioning themselves between the German fighters and the bombers. When a head-on engagement developed between a P-47 and a Bf-109, the outcome was rarely in doubt. The Messerschmitt's nose-mounted armament, typically one 20mm cannon and 2 7.92mm machine guns, paled in comparison to the Thunderbolt's broadside. Moreover, the P-47's rugged construction, including armored glass windscreens and redundant systems, meant it could absorb return fire that would have downed lighter fighters. Technical analyses conducted by Army Air Force's ordnance specialists, as documented in wartime reports, revealed that the .50 caliber round represented an ideal compromise between hitting power and ammunition capacity. The heavier 20mm and 30mm cannons favored by German and British aircraft delivered more explosive force per hit, but carried significantly less ammunition and suffered from lower rates of fire and shorter effective ranges. The .50 caliber guns on the P-47, by contrast, could reach out to 800 yards with reasonable accuracy, giving American pilots the ability to open fire before their opponents could respond effectively. Major General William Kepner, who assumed command of VI Fighter Command in August of 1943, recognized the psychological impact of the P-47's firepower. In a directive issued to all fighter groups, Kepner emphasized aggressive pursuit of German fighters. Our job isn't just to escort bombers, it's to destroy the Luftwaffe. Every German fighter shot down is one that can't attack our bombers tomorrow. This shift toward offensive fighter operations would fundamentally reshape the air war over Europe, transforming the P-47 from defensive escort into hunter-killer. The summer months saw an exponential increase in P-47 kill ratios. Pilots who had initially struggled with the aircraft's handling characteristics now understood its strengths and exploited them ruthlessly. June 26, 1943, a date etched permanently into Robert Johnson's memory, began as a routine escort mission to the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire on the French coast. The 56th Fighter Group launched at 0730 hours, climbing through broken cloud layers to reach their assigned patrol altitude of 27,000 feet. Johnson, flying as element leader in the 61st Fighter Squadron, settled into the rhythmic scan that had become second nature. Instruments, mirrors, sky. Instruments, mirrors, sky. His P-47, half-pint, carried full ammunition and 2 75-gallon drop tanks that would extend his combat radius to the limit of the mission profile. The bomber strike went smoothly, with flak causing more damage than enemy fighters. Johnson's flight maintained high cover as the B-17s turned for home, their bomb bays empty and formation integrity still intact. Then, at 1400 hours, everything went catastrophically wrong. Johnson had dropped back to assist a bomber with a smoking engine when he caught movement in his peripheral vision, a flash of gray-green camouflage rolling into a firing position. Before he could react, 20mm cannon shells from an Fw-190 hammered into his aircraft. The first impact shattered his cockpit canopy, filling the air with glass fragments and the screaming howl of 400-mile-per-hour wind. The second round punched through his right wing, severing hydraulic lines and fuel lines. A third shell detonated against the armor plate behind his seat, the impact feeling like someone had hit his back with a sledgehammer. Johnson's vision blurred from the concussion, but training took over. He shoved the stick forward, diving away from the attack, his aircraft shuddering and trailing smoke from the ruptured fuel tank. The German pilot, later identified as Oberfeldwebel Egon Mayer, a veteran with more than 50 kills, pursued relentlessly. Over the next 15 minutes, Mayer made repeated gun passes on Johnson's crippled Thunderbolt, each attack adding more damage to the accumulating devastation. Cannon shells destroyed the rudder trim, shredded the right aileron, punctured the engine cowling, and shattered the radio equipment. Johnson's instrument panel sparked and went dark. Hydraulic fluid, fuel, and engine oil streamed from multiple wounds, coating the windscreen and making forward visibility nearly impossible. Contemporary accounts from Johnson's combat report, preserved in declassified archives, documented more than 200 bullet and cannon shell impacts. The tail section looked like it had been worked over with a giant can opener. The right wing had a hole large enough to crawl through. Both elevators had been reduced to twisted aluminum frames. And yet the P-47 continued flying, its massive Pratt & Whitney engine running rough but still producing power, its control cables, routed with redundant paths through the airframe, still responding to Johnson's inputs despite the catastrophic damage. As Mayer positioned for what he clearly intended as the killing blow, Johnson did the only thing he could think of. He unfastened his seat harness, preparing to bail out. But when he tried to jettison the remains of his canopy, the mechanism wouldn't respond. The canopy rails had been bent by cannon fire, jamming the emergency release. Johnson was trapped in a dying aircraft, unable to escape, with an experienced German ace moving in for the final shot. Then Mayer did something extraordinary. After pulling alongside Johnson's P-47 and seeing the young American struggling with the jammed canopy, the German pilot broke off his attack. He pulled ahead, waggled his wings, the universal aviation signal for "follow me," and appeared to be leading Johnson toward a nearby German airfield for capture. But Johnson, bleeding from glass cuts and half-deaf from the wind roar, misinterpreted the gesture. He thought Mayer was gloating, showing off. In a moment of pure fury, Johnson fired his remaining operational guns. 3 of the 8 were still functioning, sending a stream of 50-caliber rounds past the Focke-Wulf's canopy. Mayer immediately rolled away and departed, perhaps deciding that this particular American was more trouble than he was worth. Johnson turned half-pint toward England, flying at wave-top height to avoid radar detection, nursing the dying aircraft across 150 miles of ocean on instruments that barely functioned. When he finally crossed the English coast near Dover, his fuel gauges read empty. The engine coughed twice, then seized completely. Johnson had just enough altitude to glide to RAF Manston, where he executed a belly landing on the emergency runway, the P-47 skidding to a halt in a shower of sparks and grinding metal. Ground crews who examined the wreckage couldn't believe Johnson had survived, much less flown the aircraft home. The incident became legendary within the 8th Air Force, demonstrating the incredible durability that Republic's engineers had built into the P-47 structure. October 10, 1943, while the P-47 Thunderbolt was earning its reputation over Europe, another American fighter was beginning to make its presence felt: the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The twin-engine, twin-boom design looked even more unconventional than the stubby Thunderbolt, and German pilots quickly dubbed it Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. The 55th Fighter Group, flying P-38s from Nut Hampstead, provided an interesting point of comparison for evaluating different approaches to fighter design in the savage crucible of aerial combat. The strategic bombing campaign reached a crescendo during the autumn of 1943. On October 14th, the 8th Air Force returned to Schweinfurt in what would become known as the Second Schweinfurt Raid. This mission would earn the Black Thursday designation, as the attacking force lost 60 B-17s and another 17 were damaged beyond repair. A staggering 20% loss rate. The P-47 groups flew maximum effort missions, but even with improved fuel systems and larger external tanks, They could only provide escort to the German border. The final penetration and withdrawal remained a gauntlet of death for the bomber crews. Major Gerald Johnson, no relation to Robert Johnson, led the 62nd Fighter Squadron during this period, and his after-action reports provide valuable insight into evolving tactical doctrine. Johnson recognized that the P-47's greatest advantage lay not in any single characteristic, but in the combination of attributes. It could dive faster than anything else. It could take tremendous battle damage and continue flying. It could fight effectively at altitudes above 25,000 feet where German fighters struggled, and its 850 caliber guns delivered devastating firepower at ranges where enemy aircraft were poorly equipped to respond. The Luftwaffe, however, was adapting. General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, responsible for German aircraft production, accelerated programs to develop improved fighter variants. The FW-190A8 entered service with enhanced armor protection and heavier armament, including the fearsome Mk-108 30mm cannon capable of downing a bomber with just 3 hits. The Bf-109 G6 variant featured pressurized cockpits and improved high-altitude performance. German fighter tactics also evolved, with greater emphasis on attacking American bombers with rockets and heavy cannon from beyond the effective range of defensive machine guns. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, who had taken over command of the 61st Fighter Squadron, understood that the air war was becoming a contest of innovation and counter-innovation. In a letter to his wife dated November 5, 1943, Gabreski wrote, "The Hun is learning to respect the jug. They don't laugh anymore when they see us coming. In fact, most of them try to avoid us now, unless they have a significant advantage. But they're getting new equipment and new tactics. This fight is far from over." The psychological dimension of the air war deserves consideration. German fighter pilots, who had enjoyed air superiority for the first years of the conflict, now found themselves increasingly on the defensive. The appearance of American long-range fighters in ever-increasing numbers meant that Luftwaffe units could no longer choose when and where to engage. They were forced to contest every mission, even under disadvantageous circumstances, because allowing the bombers through meant watching their homeland's industrial infrastructure systematically destroyed. Hauptmann Heinz Baer, a Luftwaffe ace with more than 200 kills, recorded his impressions of the P-47 in his personal diary. "The American Thunderbolt is a formidable opponent, not because of superior agility or speed at lower altitudes, but because of its tactical employment. They dive from superior altitude, fire a devastating burst from their 8 heavy machine guns, and climb away before we can respond effectively. Attempting to follow them in a dive is suicide. Their aircraft can reach speeds that would tear our fighters apart. They have learned to fight intelligently, using their strengths while avoiding situations where we might exploit our advantages." This assessment proved remarkably accurate. American pilots were indeed learning to maximize their aircraft's capabilities while minimizing exposure to its weaknesses. The transformation from the uncertain pilots of April to the confident hunter-killers of October represented not just improved equipment, but a maturation of tactical doctrine and combat experience. January 11, 1944, the new year brought intensified operations and a subtle but significant shift in the strategic balance. Lieutenant General James Doolittle assumed command of the 8th Air Force, replacing Lieutenant General Ira Eaker in a controversial command shuffle orchestrated by General Henry Hap Arnold. Doolittle immediately implemented policy changes that would transform the nature of the air war. Most significantly, he authorized fighter pilots to abandon close bomber escort in favor of aggressive pursuit of German fighters, a shift from defensive to offensive operations that the P-47 groups had been advocating for months. The tactical implications were profound. Instead of remaining tethered to the bomber formations, P-47 pilots could now sweep ahead, clearing German fighters from the projected bomber route. They could pursue fleeing enemy aircraft back to their bases, strafing airfields and destroying aircraft on the ground. They could engage in what pilots called rat racing, free-ranging combat where speed and firepower mattered more than maneuverability. The Thunderbolt was perfectly suited to this new mission profile. Captain Walker Mahurin, now the 56th Fighter Group's leading ace with 19 confirmed victories, epitomized the new aggressive doctrine. On January 5th, Mahurin led a flight of 4 P-47s to escort bombers targeting the German port city of Kiel. As the formation approached the target area, Mahurin spotted a large gaggle of Bf-109s forming up to attack the bombers. Instead of waiting for the Germans to make their move, Mahurin rolled his flight into an immediate attack, diving from 31,000 feet with throttles pushed to the firewall. The resulting engagement demonstrated every advantage the P-47 possessed. Mahurin's first burst caught a 109 as it climbed to gain altitude, the .850 caliber stream shredding the German fighter's tail section. The Messerschmitt tumbled out of control, its pilot bailing out immediately. Mahurin zoomed back to altitude, executed a wing-over, and rolled in on a second target. This time, the German pilot saw him coming and attempted to dive away, a fatal mistake. The P-47 easily overtook the 109 in the dive, and Mahurin dispatched him with a 2-second burst that sent the enemy fighter straight into the ground. The engagement lasted less than 5 minutes. When it ended, Mahurin's flight had destroyed 7 German fighters without loss, a kill ratio that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. More importantly, the German formation had been scattered and demoralized, unable to mount effective attacks against the bombers. This outcome represented exactly what Doolittle's new doctrine aimed to achieve: destruction of the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force. Republic aviation continued improving the P-47 throughout early 1944. The P-47 D-25 variant introduced the bubble canopy, a transparent teardrop that provided 360-degree visibility, eliminating one of the aircraft's last significant deficiencies. Pilots universally praised the modification. Lieutenant Colonel Zemke, now commanding the 479th Fighter Group flying P-38s, commented that the bubble canopy P-47 was the fighter the design should have been from the beginning, all the power and firepower with visibility to match. The strategic bombing campaign entered its most intensive phase. Operation Argument, better known as Big Week, launched in late February with the objective of destroying Germany's aircraft production industry. From February 20th through February 25th, the 8th and 15th Air Forces flew more than 3,000 heavy bomber sorties against targets across Germany, escorted by nearly 1,000 fighter sorties. The P-47 groups bore the brunt of the escort duties, and their pilots responded with aggressive pursuit of any German fighters that dared to challenge the bomber streams. Luftwaffe losses during Big Week were catastrophic. German fighter units lost more than 250 aircraft destroyed and another 200 damaged, but more critically, they lost experienced pilots who could not be easily replaced. Training programs that had once produced highly skilled aviators were now rushing inadequately prepared pilots into combat, where they fell victim to the increasingly competent American fighter force. The qualitative advantage was shifting decisively in favor of the Allies. Hauptmann Georg Peter Eder, a veteran fighter pilot recovering from wounds received in combat, wrote in his journal about the changing nature of the air war. "We are being bled to death. Every day brings more American fighters, more bombers, more destruction. Our new pilots survive an average of 3 missions before being killed or wounded. The Thunderbolts and Mustangs, and now these accursed P-51s that can escort the bombers all the way to Berlin, are everywhere." June 6, 1944, the massive invasion of Normandy, Operation Overlord, marked a fundamental transformation in the air war over Europe. The strategic bombing campaign, which had consumed Allied air resources for 2 years, now shifted to tactical support of ground operations. The P-47, which had earned its reputation as a high-altitude escort fighter, would discover an entirely new role: ground attack and close air support. In this mission, the Thunderbolt's rugged construction and heavy armament made it perhaps the most effective fighter bomber of the entire war. The 56th Fighter Group, along with other P-47 units, began carrying bombs and rockets in addition to their standard gun armament. The aircraft's load-carrying capacity, a function of that massive wing and powerful engine, allowed it to haul 2 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets while retaining full ammunition for its .850 caliber guns. Pilots discovered that the stable gun platform that made the P-47 deadly in air-to-air combat also made it exceptionally accurate in ground attack. Major Robert Johnson, promoted after his harrowing survival the previous June, led some of the first ground attack missions against German positions in Normandy. On June 10th, his flight attacked German armor concentrations near Caen, diving through intense flak to deliver bombs and rockets at near point-blank range. The 8 machine guns proved equally effective against ground targets, capable of penetrating light armor and devastating soft-skinned vehicles. Johnson's combat report noted, "We caught a column of trucks and half-tracks on a narrow road. After our first pass, nothing was moving. The 50 caliber rounds just tore them apart." The effectiveness of P-47 ground attack created a new problem for German forces. Daylight movement became nearly suicidal. Allied fighter bombers, which the Germans called J-bows, short for Jagdbomber, patrolled constantly over the battlefield, attacking anything that moved. German units were forced to conduct all logistics and troop movements at night, dramatically reducing their operational flexibility. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in France, reported to Berlin that, "The enemy's air superiority has become absolute. We cannot move, cannot concentrate forces, cannot supply our forward units. The American Thunderbolts are particularly feared by our troops." As Allied ground forces broke out from the Normandy beachhead in late July, P-47 groups participated in devastating attacks against retreating German columns. The Falaise Pocket, where elements of 2 German armies became trapped between advancing Allied forces, became a killing ground where P-47s and other Allied aircraft destroyed thousands of vehicles in a week of relentless attacks. Gun camera footage from these missions, preserved in military archives, showed the awesome destructive power of the 850 caliber guns. Trucks exploding, armor burning, entire convoys reduced to twisted wreckage. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, who had risen to command the 61st Fighter Squadron and become the leading American ace in Europe with 31 confirmed aerial victories, fell victim to ground fire during a low-level strafing mission on July 20th. His P-47 was hit by small arms fire while attacking a German airfield, forcing him to crash land in occupied territory. Gabreski evaded capture for several days before being taken prisoner, where he would remain until the war's end. His loss illustrated the risks of low-altitude operations, but his legacy, the tactical doctrines he had helped develop, continued guiding P-47 operations through the war's final months. The air war over Germany continued intensifying through the autumn and winter of 1944. The introduction of German jet fighters, particularly the Messerschmitt Me-262, presented a new threat that the P-47 was ill-equipped to counter in traditional air combat. The jets were simply too fast for propeller-driven fighters to catch. However, P-47 pilots adapted by attacking the jets during their most vulnerable moments, during takeoff and landing, when their speed advantage disappeared. Numerous Me-262s fell victim to P-47s that loitered near known jet bases, waiting for the opportunity to catch them at low altitude and low speed. By war's end in May of 1945, the P-47 Thunderbolt had compiled an impressive combat record.